दिलों में तुम अपनी बेताबियां लेके चल रहे हो तो जिंदा हो। नजर में ख्वाबों की बिजलियां लेके चल रहे हो तो जिंदा हो। हवा के झोंकों के जैसे आजाद रहना सीखो। तुम एक दरिया के जैसे लहरों में बहना सीखो। हर एक लम्हे से तुम मिलो, खोले अपनी बाहें। हर एक पल एक नया समा देखिए। जो अपनी आंखों में हैरानियां लेके चल रहे हैं तो जिंदा हो, जिंदा हो। दिलों में तुम अपनी बेताबियां लेके चल रहे हो तो जिंदा हो, जिंदा हो।
गुड मॉर्निंग, गुड इवनिंग, गुड आफ्टरनून, wherever you are. और आपको एक नमस्कार. Thank you so much for joining us today in the second episode of Leadership Insights with me, Prashant. I would like to start by saying thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you for the amazing response that the first episode got. Thank you so much for giving me the support that is required for me to start this initiative. Because last time I shared with you that this show is my dream. There is a mission that I am on of bringing awareness of leadership, which is much required. Those insights of leadership, those small little things that get ignored, is why I created this show. It's a platform, it's a vehicle for me to bring people who are amazing at it, who had some amazing experiences in their life, who can bring in the real, authentic experiences forward, who can bring in those insights through their life story, through their journeys that can add value to us. So if you are somebody who's an aspiring leader, or if you're somebody who's at a first level, middle level, or a senior management position, this show will add value to you. I have a request for every one of you that the way to engage and make this show more valuable for everybody who is here and for everyone who will watch it in recording later is to please add your value, your comments, your perspective to this show. You can do that by using the comment section. Please put your comments there. Please put your questions there. We will try to address them in today's conversation. If not, we will get back to them and we will come back to you. And there is so much that we can gain from it. So that's a promise. That's a commitment that I request you to give. So now, having said that, it's time that we move inside and dive into the second episode of Leadership Insights with Prashant. So it's time for us to talk to the amazing guest who we have here with us today. Now, this is a person who has 24 years of experience in the corporate world. And she has worked with established, reputed corporations and provided transformative people leadership across levels. Now, this is a lady who's powerhouse of energy. She is abundance of positivity. And now when we talk to her, you will realize that she's authentic, she's straightforward, and she's honest in her conversations as well. Now, she has handled all aspects of HR, including IR, recruitment, L&D, compensation, benefit, policies, whatever you can think of in the HR domain, she has done that in the last few years. And she specializes in mergers and acquisition, be it domestic or be it international. Now, all of this is not just in one organization or just one domain or one industry. The best part is she has experience around domains, around different industries, be it ITES, travel, healthcare, manufacturing, or telecom. She has been there. Now, this brings in a diversity of perspective to her and in her experiences that she's going to share with us. So, without further ado, let's call the lady who is going to add amazing value to our show today. So, with a very, very warm emotions in my heart, let's welcome Debjani Roy with us. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, and very good morning, Prashant. And like you, I'll say good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. It's really fantastic to be on your show. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on this show. I want to be very honest and tell you how I feel. Right from the first show, which I did with Gauri and now with you, you guys have been so kind in appreciating and supporting me in something new that I'm creating. I'm not somebody who's been doing it for a long time. You guys are masters in what you do. So thank you so much for this support. By saying yes to being here, it means a lot to me. So thanks a lot to you, Debbie. Thank you so much.
Hey, don't say that. This is the minimum that we can do. We're here because we love you. We admire the kind of work that you're doing. We want more people like you to be empowered enough to take, something like this chat show to a different level. We want you to create, a thought leadership. We want to create thought leadership through these kind of capsules. And when you have people like Gauri, and I'm sure you're going to have many more such illustrious leaders on your show, then you're bound to get there. So I think this is the minimum that one can do to be part of the show. I'm here because I love to be here, not because of any favor or any gratitude, or anything that I owe anybody anything. So thank you again, once again. It's great to be with you, with a smiling, bubbly, effervescent person like Prashant Handu. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You made my day. We can just close the show. Thank you guys. I think that's all for today.
It's
All right.
pre-independence, man. There's something in the air.
Yes, yes, there is something in there. I feel very free. So,
Yeah,
I think that's a good feeling to have.
yeah.
So coming to the show, it's called Leadership Insights with Prashant. So the first question that I always ask, and I get to hear the perspective of the guest on leadership is what I try to do and try to find out in the first question. So, we all have experiences in our life, and as humans, as it is said through a lot of researches of psychology, that our experiences start forming some layers in our subconscious from a very young age, right? Knowingly, unknowingly, we start picking up things. Now, in these experiences that you have of so many years, Debbie, personally and professionally, you would have also picked up a lot of things. Now, when it comes to leadership in particular that we are talking about, our mind has a way of giving meaning to everything, right? Everybody has a very unique meaning to everything that is only, personal to them, and they feel about it, they connect to that meaning. So when I talk leadership, or when I say this term leadership, if you just think back as a person, as Debjani Roy, what does leadership mean to you?
Ah, first and foremost, leadership is being one amongst equals. Okay, I truly believe in that. It's a very small proverb. It says being one amongst equals, meaning that if you are really truly a leader, it comes to you by virtue of the accolades, the respect, the reverence, and the kind of feelings that people have around you. It's not something that you claim to be yours as a matter of right. Very often, I also find another paradigm of the same saying, which is being first among equals. This is what our presidents and prime ministers, and at one point of time, the royalty also used to follow. And here, thereafter, the legacy has continued, and you have the first lady. Okay, by definition, you have a first lady. Now, I refuse to admit that somebody can be a first lady by definition. I refuse to admit that somebody can climb on an Air Force One just by virtue of being the president of a country. You have to earn it. Your credibility has to be established first amongst people with whom you are working. It has to start from the grassroots. It has to be something where you dirty your hands. It's not something which is armchair. It can never be armchair where you're always maintaining at a distance with the real people on the ground level. So these are the essentials, which I think is what true leadership is all about. For it to be authentic and genuine, you've got to be with the masses. You've got to be with them to listen to what they're saying. Your listening has to be uppermost more than what you talk, because the talking part comes later. And it's only when you listen well can you actually give vision to somebody else's dreams through the kind of vision that you create for them. So that's true leadership. And that has to be one amongst equal. That has to be you start humble and people take you to that position of leadership by virtue of what they see in you, demonstrated in actions, and heard from you. And that's when true leadership really emerges.
Wow. Wow, that's great. What I hear you saying is definitely insightful. And one thing that got stuck with me, and I'm not able to take it out of my mind, is you said something right in the beginning. You said leadership is how people feel around you when they are around you. Can you talk a little more about that? That's very deep.
Yes, yes, because see, leadership is a much done to death concept. Okay, but it's very, very simple to exercise and to actually be with it if you simplify it and break it down to little pieces. What is leadership? It starts very early in your childhood. It starts when, even amongst your peer groups, your cousins, your sisters, your siblings at home, you suddenly choose to take the leadership role, or you say, oh, it's hide and seek, I'm going to be the first den. When somebody puts that little pink figure up and says, I'm going to be the den, there is that little finishing line, that last mile kind of a tenacity that that person brings to the table, which is the first mark of the fact that this person thinks a little differently. This person can go that extra mile. He wants to take the risk, more importantly. Then you grow up in life. You suddenly assume responsibilities. Now, there are people who shirk responsibilities. There are people who demand rights. In a family, you'll find there are people who think that you're being born into, the position that they are in. They are liable to get what they are getting in life. But is that true? Is it not there? Consider yourself how fortunate you are when compared to so many of the disadvantaged millions who are nowhere close to where you are. Now, if you were to be in a race with them, would it have been so easy for you to just command it as a right? No. So, possibly it's important, even as a leader, to sometimes take a step back, pause, and think about what you have in hand at the cost of what you could have been. When you compare yourself with so many others, this is all feeling. This is all emotional. It's not something which is in action all the time. You don't have to be a super busybody. You don't have to, exude different, competencies to show every time that, you are a leader. Leadership comes from the depth of your feelings. Leadership comes from the smile which should reach your eye when you are in the midst of people. Only when people laugh with you, make that gargling sound, and not just, quip and give a slide smile at the side of a table. And when the eyes light up, when they see you approach them, that's the feeling which is of true leadership. Now, that is something which is difficult to earn. It's very, very difficult because unfortunately, most of the times, leaders, they just get into the spot because of having been in the right time and the right place. Most often than not, they're nominated or they're chosen, by virtue of a certain process. But it may not be a people movement. But the true leader is one which emerges out of people's emotions, people's demand, people's reverence towards you, which who wants to see you at the helm of affairs because they truly believe that you will provide them with value, okay? At the same time, creating that ambience of camaraderie, creating that ambience of participation, creating that ambience of empathy, so that at every stage you will take them along with you just like everybody else. So that, I think, is something where the touch, feel, and emotional part of leadership is so very critical. You may be the best leader in action. Okay, you may have your face splurged across 10,000 magazines. You may be giving the right sound bites. You may be doing all the right things that a leader is expected to do. But as long as you are not a good man manager and you don't have the following that you need to have of people who will stand by you and support you at every juncture and say we are with you when the going gets tough, you are not a true leader.
So, what I hear you say, Debbie, in this conversation is that leadership, as much as there is a positional leadership that is handed over to people, which has its own place, it's very important and vital for everybody who's even aspiring to be a leader or an existing one to understand what is the impact they have on the people. When they enter a room, what happens? When they're around people, what kind of an energy do they create? Do they bring out the best in the people, or do they bring out the worst in the people? When they enter a room, is there silence where the conversation changes, or does the conversation continue? So it's very important to have that awareness of what impact you have on people.
Yes,
And once we are aware of the impact that we have on people is when we can influence them, when we can
yes,
actually bring them along to the vision that we have for our team or the organization, is when they will walk with us because they connect
yes.
with us as people first, right? And by
and
doing
and
this,
they and they connect you, and they connect with you at a subconscious level. They're not
hmm,
connecting with you at a surface. Positional leadership is a game which is played on the surface mostly, but an emotional, leadership is a game which is for keeps. It is something on the basis of which a leader can extend that position of being at the helm of affairs for many, many years because he would have, he doesn't give up by just having one achievement. He doesn't give up by just, doing the things which by jargon, by definition, is supposed to be meant for a leader to practice. He does it by instinct. He does it by the gut. He does it by the sixth sense. He brings spontaneity and impulsiveness to the kind of leadership quality that he, demonstrates, and all that touches people at a certain level. So it's at the subconscious. It's not something which is skimming the surface.
very, very well said. And I think similar feeling happens in a family, right? Where or with your friends, where you don't have to say things just happen.
Yes.
When we were having the conversation earlier before we started the show, you spoke about silence. That was so beautiful, where you said, two people are subconsciously connected when they don't even have to speak. Even if they are sitting in silence,
Yeah.
communication is happening.
Yeah.
The conversation is
Yeah.
still on. You just can't see it, you can't hear it, right? But it's still happening.
Yes.
Now that's
Yes.
that's an amazing thought, Debbie, that you brought forward. Now this brings me to the next thought that's running in my mind. When I talk about leadership to anybody, or when we read about leadership, conversations that happen about leadership, they mostly happen around these elements which are generic in nature, which means they're very important, they're very vital, and they build the foundational block for every leader or every level of leadership. Now, if you're a first time leader, middle level manager, CXO, CEO, or if you're an entrepreneur running your own business, at every level, these are the foundational elements. If these are missing, you're setting yourself up for failure, or you're setting your people up for failure, right? Now, as much as these foundational elements are important, and we shall talk about it, let's move on to understand more specifics, because your journey of 24 plus years is what attracted me the most. I see there is expertise not in just one domain, there is expertise in multiple domains, and it's not just domains, there is expertise in multiple roles and level of leadership in
Yeah.
multiple industries and sectors. Now
Yeah.
this tells me here is a person who has not taken a very linear path. This person has gone zigzag. This person has gone around and has reached where this person is right now. So that tells me that there are a lot of stories. That tells me there is a lot that you would have gone through personally and professionally to be where you are. So my promise to the audience in our post for the show was that we will get into specifics to understand the challenges of leadership at a first time leadership level, at a middle level leadership level, and at a senior leadership level, and how to overcome those challenges. So my request to you, Debbie, is that if you could just maybe you need few seconds. If you can just go back, I would want to take you back the memory lane, go back years and years, and think about that moment when you were chosen or you were given this responsibility of being a leader. How was that whole experience? And if you can take us from being a first time leader to where you are today and share some quick tips of your journey, which can help our audience to become leaders or grow as leaders. Over to you.
That's a fascinating question. It's almost like my journey of 25 plus years being, put into a capsule.
Yeah.
So, as you were narrating the question, there are different visions and there were different memories and there were different pictures, which were, I went into a flashback. So there were, my initial days of leadership. I don't even want to call it leadership. I think the initial days of carving out a niche for myself as a professional. Okay, I would actually wear overalls, which were not required for me to wear because I
Okay.
was a management trainee. I started my career as a management trainee in a 30,000 population factory, okay, in a state like Orissa, okay, and it was a tough business, smelting of aluminium, okay, and extracting bauxite from bauxite mines, both very tough journeys. And I didn't need to wear overalls, but then how do you establish your camaraderie and your oneness with people or with whom you are going to be actually doing your work? Because as I said, leadership can never be armchair. The moment you are behind a desk and you're trying to prescribe, you're better off being a doctor. You're probably not a good HR manager because human resource happens at the shop floor. And one of the things I realized that I needed to do when I joined as a management trainee is to break that image which I was carrying in my mind. And why I'm narrating this story is this can be one of the fallacies of the newbies who join organizations straight from B schools and E schools, with a little chip on the shoulder, with vanity written all around. Okay, they would like to be sitting inside cabins from day one, being addressed as a manager and a sir. But then, if you don't rub your hands with grease paint, and if you don't sort of hobnob with people at the grassroots level, you will never earn the credibility that's going to take you miles in that journey. Okay, people will look at you with distrust. People will look at you as somebody who's better off left in a comfort zone. They would not even approach you, and you'd be a failure in your job as of human resource. So there I was from Delhi in a state like Orissa, I was fluent in English, I was fluent in Hindi and my vernacular language, Bengali, but I didn't know Oriya. And obviously, when you go from Delhi, your ways of dressing, your ways of being, your ways of carrying yourself is very different. So when I would walk into the shop floor, the workers and the supervisor would really size me up. And that was the first lesson I learned, that get your thick skin on. Okay, because nobody was going to do charity for you. Nobody was going to look at you and say, oh, here is this little girl, she's just come out of college, let's give her a good time, let's make her, let's give her a honeymoon period and help her acclimatize herself. I was left to the big bad world, and I had to establish my ability to move in that world on my own sense. The first thing I realized, Prashant, was that you had to learn the language. There is this question of son of the soil. A lot of people deride this concept of being son of the soil, but I think it's of great use, because when you are in a country as diverse as India, okay, and when you are a professional who has aspirations to make it big, you can't say no to any of the learnings that comes on your way. So the first thing that hit me is, I can't be speaking in English to a group of people who can't speak beyond Oriya. So the first thing I did was to speak the language. Frankly, I had very good soulmates within my management trainee groups, okay, who actually coached and tutored me. And those were days, nights. I used to take crash courses in Oriya. I picked up those little, conversion books, English to Oriya, okay, and I used to not sleep at all. And in the morning, red-eyed, I'd walk into the factory, but I would make my attempt to see Kemti Achanti, so that they at least understand that here is somebody who's making that effort. You see, you don't have to be fluent. Nobody was asking you to be fluent, but they wanted to see genuineness. They wanted to see beyond your skin. They wanted to see beyond your dress. I know it might be, sounding very archaic, but those were the days of 94, 95, which is when I started my career. And those were tough days, okay? Not as empowered and liberated as it is today. Okay, that's when I started going and sitting down with the factory workers in their pantry, rather than have my lunch in the executive pantry, which was meant for management trainees. So we're wearing overalls. Okay, I actually pleaded with my management to give me a set of overalls. I wore those overalls, walked into the MES, which is the mobile equipment shop, where these huge alumina, ingots were being taken out. This huge machinery were all loaded, grease paint all around, and these factory workers would come out and unwind their tiffin boxes, and they would eat, whatever they could bring from home. And it was a great feeling when you walked up to them and said that, I've only got this much, which was cooked by my maid in the morning. Would you like to share? Initially, very, very hesitant. Initially, it was almost looked at as a gimmick, but then you had to be persistent. You had to work at it. Ultimately, believe me, Prashant, when I walked into that factory after about 6 months, I had a solid following behind me. I had a sea wave of blue overalls following me everywhere. I didn't have to do any scouting myself. I had to then start picking up the stories. Okay, tell me, how many times does your manager visit the flower shop? Does he even have small group activities? Does he take communication classes with you? Does he listen to you? Where do you think the suggestion schemes are going? Are your suggestions even adhered to? They were full of stories. So much so that in 1 year's time, I can say with pride, with the help of those factory workers and the supervisors, we unearthed millions of dollars worth of equipment which were lying unused in a back junkyard. Okay, by some folly, some management had asked for it, but the next management, when they came, didn't make use of it. So they were all lying there. Okay, it was not even considered worth scrap value. But when we rehauled the whole thing, and the current management actually decided to look at it objectively, there was savings worth millions. And there were a group of factory workers who were actually rewarded with 10% of the total cost. So that was an example that was set for the first time.
Wow.
And those were the kind of thoughts. So thought leadership is something which is not incumbent to you having salt and pepper hair. It's something which I'd like to suggest everybody. Whether you're a management trainee, you're a first-time manager, a mid-level manager, or whichever position you're at, thought leadership can always be practiced. Okay, maybe in the initial stages you don't have the opportunity to sit through board meetings or large meetings where cross section of leaders are there, but you can use your team, you can use your boss, as long as you are doing it in a non-threatening manner and you take people along and you make it seem like a teamwork, you will get your opportunity to finally present your thought. And once you make that mark, your leadership journey starts in true strength. Because everything else left aside, everybody has definite reverence and respect for intellectual acumen. You can't pull a wool on somebody's eye on that level. Pretense can go only as far, but when it comes to your knowledge and your application science and your execution ability, pretense doesn't go too far. So as long as you're honing those skills of yours, you are genuine to the cause, you're honestly looking at people problems, which is what HR is all about, and you're there at the right time making the right suggestions, you will find your time and you will start building on it. So those are things which come in very handy at the initial stages of leadership. Of course, there are.
May I interrupt? Is
Sorry.
that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to make sure that I'm getting it right, and we are able to get that capsuled learning from what you shared. From what I heard, this is what I could understand in a gist: is that as a first-time leader, as a first-time employee, or as a first-time management positional employee in an organization, it becomes very vital that instead of you going out there and showing what you're capable of, displaying who you are, what experience, what baggage, what educational qualifications you carry, and feel entitled to a certain kind of respect, feel entitled to a certain kind of communication coming your way, feeling entitled to a certain kind of behavior, which will backfire, it is best to leave that aside. Are those your strengths? Yes. Do they bring in an element of value to the organization, to the people? Yes. But when you're new to a certain role, especially as a first time leader or new to an organization, what I heard you say was, first try to understand what is happening in that organization. Now
Yeah,
in your case, be it even the state, be it was Orissa, right? So the whole idea, if you look at it just as a concept, is that whenever you are in a new space, be it a state, be it an organization, be it a city, instead of making a change, instead of boasting about what you bring in and you try to push any changes, understand what is happening there. It could
yeah,
be language, it could be culture, it could be people. First get that in, become a part of what is already happening there. Observe that. You don't have to necessarily take action on something you don't believe in, but observe what is happening. Get along with people, become a part of what is happening there, and then slowly and steadily people will start opening up to you. They will start connecting with you, and you will get to know what is happening. Like how you said, there were machines that are put out there for millions, right? And that were just been lying there. If the communication had not happened, if the conversations had not happened, people wouldn't have opened up about it, and that would they would have remained there, right? And such a big loss for the organization. So in a gist, what I think you are trying to say is that you need to earn the right to be a leader, even as a first time leader. Any baggage
absolutely.
that you're carrying from your past of experience or education, leave it aside. Go and connect with people as people first. Get people along, communicate with them, understand with them, become a part of them, is when they will follow you, and you would have earned that right to be a leader, even if that's the first time leadership. Is that right?
Absolutely fantastic, beautifully put together. The only thing that remains to be added here is, at any point of time, especially when you're trying to hit the mark in the initial days, you have to be a bundle of energy, grit, tenacity. Sometimes you have to actually swallow, some of the insults, okay, and wait for your time to really turn it around. You need to have resilience more than anything else. So, resilience is not something which is today. Resilience is something which is applicable to you right from day one when you get out into the big bad world, because you don't know what you're going to be encountering. Therefore, it's important for you to have those qualities built in right from start. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind is, if at the start you remain too aggressive, you go too aggressive, or you remain too passive, there are problems both ways. If you go too aggressive, you will be looked at as somebody who's like a bull in a china shop. Okay, people would get unnerved. They will not feel comfortable approaching you, and that can kill the efficiency of an HR person. I'm only talking in terms of HR efficiency here. And if you remain too passive, people will walk over you. People will never give you the due share, because you will keep waiting for that one beautiful chance when somebody will be there to hear your voice, but you will actually have to create those opportunities for yourself. So my whole point of saying learn the language, be there when it matters, be a part of the conversation that the general man on the workshop is actually going through. The moment you can be a part of their conversation, you've earned the right to be amongst them. That's the
Super.
time when your journey really starts, because you will be looked at as somebody who can equally contribute to the conversation. And that's when you can start making your points felt.
Wonderful, Debbie. So, for everyone out there who is aspiring to be a leader and would be the first time leader or is already at a front line, at a first line of leadership, important to understand that don't be aggressive, don't be passive. Try to be assertive, try to be communicative with your people, connect with your people, try to understand what's happening around. Only when you take people along with you is when you will be able to move forward with them. Otherwise, you would fail as a leader and they will fail as your
Yeah,
employees, as your team members.
yeah.
Great. So moving on, Debbie, your first time leadership, when you became a first time leader, I understand that, the journey wasn't easy. You mentioned grit, you mentioned resilience. That's the journey that you had to go through. Now, as you transitioned and moved along and came the time for you to move to the next level of leadership, how was that transition? What was happening then? And, how was that journey?
This transition manager, which is really moving from the junior to the mid levels, and then from the
Mhm.
mid levels to the senior. This is what the transition manager is, what I call them. These are typical cases of situational leadership. Okay.
Mhm.
And this is something which you earn as you actually work the hierarchy in organizations, because first time is what you earn by your own ways. Okay, you're hitting it. Sometimes you win it, sometimes you lose it, but nevertheless you learn in the process. But then what happens is you start observing around you, you start looking at the culture, you start looking at how does leadership work in the organization. Is it only top down leadership, or is there an opportunity even for a voice from the bottom to reach to the top? What are the kind of systems and processes? Is it participative management, or is it only empowered to the extent of a few cliques and CXO groups who have the ability to voice concerns, but for the rest of the people it's only a point of follow the direction. So once the mid manager piece is a very crucial piece, because this is what you observe, and you therefore start building on your capabilities in the way that you want to be known as. Now, do I want to be known as a champion of people? Do I want to be known as a balancer? Do I want to be? So these are all the different kinds of roles that HR managers or HR leadership can be talked about. So am I looked at as somebody who plays it safe? Or am I looked at somebody who will take a risk and, probably go out there and take a position for somebody else who can't do it for themselves? So there are different traits that you observe in the organization, and looking at how the organization actually accepts those different traits, you start building on your own leadership skills. So, for instance, my mid manager levels were primarily spent in one organization called Bharti Telecom. Okay,
Okay.
which at that point of time was really not the telecom king or the giant that we know them as. Okay,
Mhm.
1996 when I joined them, I was the first member of the corporate HR, and I was
Oh,
actually interviewed by Mr. Sunil Mittal, because
wow.
he just wanted to make sure that things don't go wrong. They had just signed up on the first commercial Airtel license for Delhi. Mobile telephony had just not been launched even then. Just the license had been signed. Bharti was known as a typically traditional old family kind of an organization. They were basically into telephone manufacturing or healthcare manufacturing, capsule manufacturing. So this was the first time they were getting service orientation, and they were actually joining up with world leaders like Telecom Italia, Deutsche Telekom, British Telecom, and the organization needed to completely recalibrate itself. So then they started hiring professionals from the market, and professionals who were empowered to actually exercise their learning, to actually experiment with things that, let me tell you, Prashant, many stable state organizations would probably not have allowed. But I spent 10 years with Bharti. Of those 10 years, my first 6 years were the absolutely fundamental years that I will not exchange for anything. Because, I mean, to the extent that cross legged, we were sitting in the corporate office, lights would be out sometimes. Okay, we would be studying manuals and gadgets on, on manpower formulations, on manpower thumb rules and stuff like that in candlelight, because the Madhya Pradesh landline telephony was also something which was going to be launched for the first time. So luckily Bharti had a lot of firsts. It was the first Mantra Online ISP provider. It was the first VSAT service. It was the first mobile telephony. It was the first landline telephony. You name it, and they were the pioneers. And once they established themselves, then they started this very aggressive journey of not only being a North Indian player, but a player who wanted to be, have a footstep all across the country. So there were a lot of mergers and acquisitions. They were gobbling up the different players in the States. So today that we were eating up JD Mobile, next day we were doing SkyCell, third day we were doing Spice. So it was a journey like never before. And because I was in the corporate office, I was absolutely humbled enough to have had the opportunity to play a massive role in most of it. So much so that at the end of it, when the ESOP scheme was launched, because of my performance, I was the highest performer in the ninth grade. And the number of ESOPs I got was double the ESOPs that my director personnel got.
Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
so
Wow.
that was a time when you performed and you were rewarded in true sense. So it was the
Hmm.
most eclectic and fundamental period of any individual's lifetime, especially the mid managerial life, where
Hmm.
at least I had the opportunity to experiment, learn from mistakes, again, go ahead. There were nobody telling me not to try. Okay,
Hmm.
but yes, there were certain boundaries that needed to be adhered to, but there was a
Hmm.
lot of empowerment, and that was that sense of empowerment can actually give you tremendous ability and courage to sort of hone your leadership skill. Because I never ever learned to say no. Number one, I never ever learned to say this cannot be done. See,
Hmm.
those kind of statements were not admissible in Bharti at that time. If you said something like that, you were in the wrong place.
Hmm.
It's not as if, things were that simple, but then your attitude and your ability to confront the challenges had to be uppermost, and that had to be a visible, a visible competence at that point of time, given the
Hmm.
fact that Bharti was charting such an ambitious growth path for itself. So it
Hmm.
needed the kind of competence and human resource who also would scale up to take on those added responsibilities. So, middle management level is a fantastic study of what an organization is all about. You study it first, you understand situational leadership. How are the leaders in your organization really working? What are the kinds of leadership that are actually honed and rewarded? How do they expect? What is the expectation of the organization at the end of the day? Very important to size that. And only after that can you actually recalibrate your strategy to say, I would like to be there for this kind of a leader.
Wow, wow, well said, Debjani. Now, these thoughts that you are gathering, they're so amazing. The journey that, the respect for you is going to a very different level because of the journey that you've had, right? It must, just listening to it for a few minutes, you go through certain emotions of what you would have gone through to set it up. And we're talking 20, 25 years back, when all this was just starting, nobody knew it. So right now there are point of references for people, but that time you didn't even have point of references. So you had to
No.
create things from scratch. That would have been amazing. Now, one thing that, focusing on the first time leadership and the transition to middle level management, what we I gather from our conversation is that as a first time leader, you're new to leadership, which means you're more attached to that position because you've gotten it for the very first time, right? So there is a confusion of what to do with it. You're also fighting an inner battle, that yesterday I
Yeah.
was not one, but today I am one. So I have a designation attached, so I have to be a certain way, I have to act a certain way. So all that confusion is running in the mind, and you said that leave all that, let that turmoil be inside you, but first try to connect with your people, first try to understand what is happening around, because if you take people along, if you earn their respect, if you earn their belonging with you, is when they will look up to you as a leader, and the journey will be smoother to take them forward, right? And that is where the authority can be used at times where the decisions have to be made. Now,
Yes.
then you spoke about the middle level management, where you said that your transition was into a journey which was not easy. You had a huge challenge coming your way. You made a very interesting statement where you said that if you had to actually know the pulse of an organization, middle level management is the right thing to study. To understand that zone, what is happening there. So it's like the heart of the organization. It
Yes.
decides how much blood is getting pumped into the organization, how much blood is going where. Now, one thought that bothers, I wouldn't say maybe bother is not the right word, but one thought that comes into my mind is that the biggest transition that I see is when you move from a first time leader to a middle level manager, you kind of move paths towards the strategic management more compared to tactical management. So it moves towards more towards the strategic thing. And another thing that happens interestingly is that a few years back you got into a first time leadership position where you had employees reporting to you. Now as a middle level manager you have leaders reporting to you,
Yeah.
right? It's the first time that you will have some leaders reporting to you. So how's that experience? Can you share something on those lines? How is it different from being a first time leader to being leader of leaders?
So that's again a very fantastic, context that you've laid out. The movement from the first-time leader to a mid-manager and then to a transitioning to the senior levels, they bring with them two basic changes in approach. One, as you rightly said, the tactical part of the job goes down. So you're no longer into operational nitty gritties every day, but it starts assuming a more strategic level. Okay,
Hmm.
it starts assuming a more thought leadership level where you're
Hmm.
expected to contribute as much to what should be happening in the next 3 to 5 years than just talk about what can happen in the rest of the year, okay, of
Hmm.
the current year. So
Hmm.
obviously the whole level of conversation and the whole level of your expected execution ability changes. The second important thing is, while you are at the junior levels, you're working still a lot with processes, systems, this, that, putting the entire fabric and the DNA in place, okay,
Hmm.
which is stitching up the entire factory space, as we call it, making
Hmm.
sure that the nuts and bolts are all well placed so that beyond the point, the whole thing starts working like a well oiled machinery.
Hmm.
Recruitment should happen the way it is. The processes
Hmm.
should take care of themselves. Even if
Hmm.
there was no AI and machine learning at that time, we had junior people who used to eliminate a lot of people by virtue of their intellectual acumen as to who fits in and who doesn't, looking at the job descriptions. So
Hmm.
there was efficiency even then, except that it was human efficiency. It was
Hmm.
not the machine time yet. Okay. But the more you move into the paradigm of higher echelons, especially the mid management, your man managing ability, and that's where you made that very pertinent point, that you suddenly become a leader of leaders. You're not just a leader of people, you're becoming a leader of leaders. Your man management capability comes under scrutiny for the first time. And the lessons, however, of knowing how to teach every member of your team, whether it's just a normal person or whether it's a leader, starts quite early in life. See, one of the things that I told you, leadership is not something which you claim by right. Leadership is hard earned. Leadership, according to me, is to be first among, is not to be first among equals. You have to be one among equals. You can't be calling yourself a leader. You have to allow the rest of the people around you to look at you and say, I like that as my leader. That's what I want in my leader. That's who I feel comfortable around my leader. So that when such things are spoken, you are doing the right thing. So one of the greatest aspects of this learning is that suddenly from an individual contributor you become a team manager. So the first, friction happens there. Because till yesterday, you were being looked at as a bum chum of the rest of the team, but suddenly they
Hmm.
had to look at you as somebody from whom they had to take decisions. They had to take directions. So you needed to make sure that when you gave those directions and decisions, it was not didactic, it was not patronizing. It had to come across as participative. So even
Hmm.
if the direction was yours, you had to say, look, guys, this is how I feel. Is this also something that you're okay with? Or is there another point of view? Let's hear it. So the number of brainstorming sessions, the number of small group activities, the number of even a conversation over a cup of coffee, okay, at the vending machine would help you in realizing how to take different people along because every member would be different from each other. So you had to have a mental map of what makes every member tick. Okay, that's the first thing that you learn to do in HR. How do you create mental maps around the human processes? Okay, and when I say human process, it's the brain. How are you doing
Hmm.
that mapping?
Hmm.
Second time, when you now suddenly have leaders who've been there and they could have been leaders by virtue of being elder to you or earlier to you or
Hmm.
actually subject matter experts who probably know more than you. It could happen either way. Okay,
Hmm.
the first thing we should learn to do, Prashant, is to give them their due. Okay, I may be a leader today and I may be in a position today senior to them by rank because of some good things that I did. And so the organization recognized that I probably have the bandwidth, the capability within me to take things a little forward than the incumbents who were already there. Now, that's an organizational decision. But do I have to capitalize on that? Yes. Just by giving a directive, I don't become a leader of leaders tomorrow. I have to earn the respect of those leader of leaders. That is done two ways. Wait for an opportunity to showcase your strength. Number one, wait for that opportunity to showcase your strength. Don't go voicing it all the time. Because if you keep voicing it and if you keep pinning things your way all the time, it will be seen as somebody who's trying too hard to prove herself, okay, rather than it come naturally. So wait for that opportunity for you to make the mark. Second, give the person the due, because even if you give the credit to the other person, he's anyway been there as a senior, okay, but you have the rank senior to him today, so nobody can take that away from you. So if you extend an empathy, if you extend that level of camaraderie to say we are in this together, and I'm going to be looking at you for direction and for all possible support at many occasions, and I hope you're fine with it. If you can give that assurance to that senior person, both will start doing the trick. That senior person will realize she or he is not out there to cut my limbs. Number one. Okay. Number two, she has the intellectual acumen, the ability to take teams along, to be able to master the craft of doing strategy beyond her years, which is why she has been put over me. So once that realization comes about, because of these two things that you have to keep balancing, that's when you actually start becoming successful as a leader of leaders. It's a very
Wow.
difficult task. Continues to be a challenge even today, despite
Yeah.
number of bestsellers in the market and
Hmm.
number of speakers on TEDx telling us how to do things.
True, very true. And what I get, and the insight that I picked up from the conversation was that some things which we spoke about earlier, the foundational elements remain same because you're still dealing with people, right? You're still dealing with emotional beings. Just because you have moved levels does not mean the emotions have changed, right?
Oh
A
no,
person who is a team leader does not feel sad anymore. Once you are a middle level manager, you don't feel angry anymore. That's not how it works, right?
no.
So you have to understand that at every level that you grow, the emotions still remain intact. And as a middle level manager, as you rightly said, what you have to be more aware of is that you have leaders reporting to you. So these are people who are making decisions and have teams reporting to you. So the nature of, or the requirement, or the need of collaboration and mutual respect becomes much higher, where you can't be commanding in making decisions and asking or ordering them to follow. You have to earn their respect and their belonging by having the conversation of collaboration with them, saying that we are in this together. I might be at a position to make certain decisions. Having said that, does not mean I have to decide everything. We will decide it together. We'll talk about different perspectives. I will be the one signing off on the decision, but many a times the decisions will actually come from you, which I will respect.
Yes,
So that
yes,
that conversation is very important when you're especially leading leaders. And if you have people who are beyond your age and experience, it becomes even more imperative to have such
yes,
conversations, because we
absolutely.
like it or not, we have to serve personal egos of everyone, which is not a bad thing. We all have our self-esteem, self-respect, right? It's a healthy ego that we have that needs to be respected. So you beautifully mentioned that you have to be aware of that fact as well, that you're also treating that personal ego, which is a very healthy ego, very well, so that the person is able to give the best to you and to those 10, 15 people who are reporting to that person, right? It's an effect which will cascade. So thank you for bringing that up, Debjani. This brings a clear differentiator and also tells us the commonalities. That is beautiful. Now, moving from middle level to senior level, right? Now, the game changes to a different level of strategy altogether, right? Now
Yeah,
you are running an organization. Every decision
yeah,
you make is going to change the course, the
yeah,
direction the organization moves. So,
yeah.
what can you share one challenge that you have faced? One top challenge that you think can help our audience relate to the most, and how did you overcome it? As a learning for everyone.
Well, you know what? Senior leadership is something which is very true to a personality. Okay, it is an offshoot or an outcome of years and years of different influences having gathered within you, and the way you've actually behaved around with people. Okay, so no two leaders are very similar. Okay. Now, when I was growing up, for instance, couple of examples that I had, which I used to hold very close to heart, was, let's say, a Rusi Modi. Okay. Today's generation may not even have heard of that guy. But then my dream was to understand from close how he used to have his communication forums with his top management teams, how he could differentiate between what's a strategy that is a long term, what's a mid term, what's a short term. How could he take notes in such a small 30 minutes of interlude where he could pen down what could be the strategy for the Tata Group in the next 3 years? I mean, it requires vision beyond anything else. So, honestly, Prashant, the first caliber of a leader is to be able to think beyond years. If you're only going to be thinking about what's happening today, how much of an expenditure can I, save today? Can I be a cost leader in the market? You're not going anywhere. Let me tell you. Okay, you've still got to keep your eyes on that. You've still got to keep your eyes on the operating profits, on your cash flows, on your profitability statement, all of that. But and believe you me, this is an HR head speaking, because when you become an HR head, you're a business manager first. So let's understand, you are now not only talking to an HR manager or an HR head, but you're talking to a business manager who happens to be a part of the steering committee of the CXO. Okay, the CEO group has the CHRO as much as the CFO, the CMO, the CIO, and everybody else. So you've got to take off your HR hat at times, and you've got to don the CXO hat at times. You've got to be equally pained when the organization is failing and its margins are debilitating, and you've got to actually rejoice when suddenly you signed up a brand campaign, or suddenly you signed up a few clients around the corner, and it was like hallelujah, you were off on a shoot. So you've got to be breathing, living, and dreaming like a business manager first. That's leadership. Okay, irrespective of what's your functional specialization, the moment you hit the top, that is something which is an absolute imperative. If you only keep thinking about your own function and how far that can contribute, that's anyway a part of the game plan. That's anyway part of your deliverable. My KRAs and my KPIs will obviously get measured as to what kind of HR strategy I actually coin, which will help get the business faster, which will help take the business forward. So that's anyway my deliverable. But can I think beyond that and possibly also give two separate suggestions to the rest of the CXO group, which is a more business suggestion, which has connotations on culture, which has connotations on structuring, which has connotations on people dynamics, so that together we actually define what has to be the roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years. So, your ability to impress with your knowledge, with your execution skill, and first and foremost, in all humility, you're being able to get the opinion and the acceptance of your peer group is a very critical skill for a senior leader. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Your acceptance by the peer group is uppermost. Sometimes the best of any functional manager, not just an HR manager, a best CFO or a best marketing head or a best HR manager fails just because the credibility and acceptance in the peer group is very low. So that's a very critical point to look at. Second, it's good to be close to the top. Please hear me out. Good to be close to the top, but not that close. Okay, so that when people look at you, they think that, oh, you've suddenly become skewed and you are no longer talking for the organization. This is all the more important and critical for an HR head, because you are supposed to be the balancer between a management emissary and a people champion. The day that people starts looking at you as a political human being, somebody who loves to be seen around the CEO, and honestly, Prashant, it's easy for a CHRO and CFO to be the right hand and the left hand of the CEO. These are the two major parts with whom the CEO rules the company. Everything else happens as a part of the deliverable. Okay, but without understanding what the people are bringing to the table and how the financials are looking up, the CEO can't go anywhere. So you are anyway in a powerful position. But then if you start politicking on top of that, that's what will kill your credibility overnight, because people will start having or losing faith on you. And for an HR head, for an HR performance, trust and faith go hand in hand, because those are the two underpinnings of credibility. And if you are not seen as somebody carrying credibility, you will never be able to be successful just on the basis of your theoretical knowledge or your ability to impress your peer groups, because the people have left you on the line and you are supposed to be their champion. There's no other functionary in the corporate who stands for people the way the HR head does. That is a that is a cardinal principle for any HR head to become successful, and we should not lose vision of it. So it's good to be close to the top, but not close enough for you to seem to be so entwined into the CXO group that you've lost the touch with the common man. That's a very, very critical thing. Third, empathy, compassion. Very, very important. Your suggestions, your solutions have to be customized on the basis of these two foundations. But at the same time, please tell those who are listening on the other side that you're not a goody goody function. You are not somebody who can only be an agony aunt. If the time comes, you can give it as much as you get it. You can possibly give it even worse. So HR should not be looked as a function which can be, walked over. It is not a thankless job. It is not everybody's whipping boy. We are not everybody's whipping boy. We do the one of the toughest jobs in the organization. So for the leader to make these messages absolutely clear to anybody who's hearing, including the board members, including the peer groups, and to people down below, is very critical, because everything that you do thereafter will depend on how convincingly you've been able to create this position for the HR head.
Very well said, Debbie. Very valid points that you brought forward. I'm looking at the differentiation between the first time, middle, and senior management, and you made it so clear and easy for us to understand. Now, just to quickly summarize what I got out of it, the first and foremost, the point that you mentioned, which stuck in my head, was that when you are a senior manager, you're responsible to take the organization on a certain course. That's what your responsibilities, and that is what your capability or expectation from you is. Now, having said that, you might just be leading a certain function of a business, so it's a very important thought for you to first align with that. As a senior manager, I'm not just responsible for that function. That is a given. That has to happen. That's not an option. You have to think as a business manager. You're not just leading that function. You're now part of that. You're one of the captains that is leading the ship. So you can't
Absolutely.
just think about this part of the ship, because the ship has to go together. The parts can't go around in different directions. That's a very valid point that you brought across. Second thing that you mentioned is acceptance for your peer group, because the decisions are taken together. There are 5-10 captains that are actually moving the ship forward. All 10 have to go in the same direction. So it's important that you have the acceptance of your peer group, so that they validate and they see you as a credible source. Number three, a very interesting point that you mentioned was, it's good to be close to the top, but not too close, because you need to understand and be clear about your intention of, what are you doing there? Why are you there? You're there for a certain purpose that you have, and responsibility that you have for your people. There are 1,000, 10,000, 1 million people who are actually working in your organization, who are dependent on what course you take, because their course will get deviated accordingly. So you have
Yes.
to be aware of that responsibility, that be close to the top, so that you can influence decisions, so that you can participate in decisions and make sure that the organization is going in the right way. But don't be too close where you're becoming a right left hand dummy, where you're actually not doing anything. You're just serving the purpose for yourself as an individual, but nothing for the people. And
Yes.
this brings me to the next point, where you said the empathy is very important, that you need to be connected to your people. You need to be rooted to be connected to your people. And this entire thing that we spoke about, looking at yourself as a business head, acceptance of your peer group, being too close but not too close, all of this, I think, falls and brings you to that element of empathy, saying that you're doing all this right. The empathy will automatically happen. If you're doing all this, you're doing this because you are empathetic. Otherwise, you will not be
Yes.
able to do these things, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
this is what I
Yes.
could pick up. Anything you would like to add that I missed
No,
out?
no, and the last but not the least, keep that fire in the belly, kicking all the time, because that's going to be the level where you will be challenged. Your points of view are actually going to be knocked over. There are going to be differences of opinion, and it's absolutely fine. You have to live with differences of opinion. But what is important is, how do you get that difference of opinion to a point where it doesn't become adversarial? Because you can't subsist in a system when you have adversaries. That's where that point about acceptance from peer group comes in. There will always be differences of opinion. There will always be one of your colleagues who will say, but Deb, don't you think we can also do it this way? I mean, I remember I used to have a perennial tough fight with my CMO, who used to always lobby about how much of marketing budget should be kept aside for advertising, brand building, and getting the right kind of models to actually become your brand ambassadors. And my point was, you go and do all of that, but you will not get a good organization going till you give the right increments to the people at the end of the performance year, because those were the two budgets that used to be the most keenly fought budgets in the board meeting. Is it going to be my kitty of performance management increments, or is it going to be his apportionment of the marketing budget? Now, there, very rarely did we see eye to eye, but then we conceded. I said, listen, man, you're a CMO and you've got some five heads of departments: digital head, marketing head, campaign head. Supposing you were to make a difference between all the five of them and give them some five percentage differences in terms of how much percent you can give them in terms of reward, do you think they're going to be working with you tomorrow? So you've got to find an equitable solution. And believe you me, whether you get a Shilpa Shetty, or you get a Sunil Gavaskar, or you get a Mahendra Singh Dhoni as your brand ambassador, nothing will cut ice with these five heads as long as you don't satisfy at the end of the day their penchant for reward because they worked hard for you. So this is a reality which you have to live with. So keep that fire in the belly kicking when you're at the top, because you will have challenges, you will have naysayers, you will have different kind of people throwing different kinds of points of view at you, and you've got to keep fighting for your point. You can't give up that fight. And sometimes it's also important that you learn the skill of letting the small battles be actually won by the other party so that you can finally win the war. That's a skill a lot of HR people don't learn. They want to win every battle. It's humanly impossible to win every battle. But you've got to do the cost benefit analysis. You've got to do that little quick mental math to say, I give it to him because I'm going to now get the bigger one out of him. That's the way you'll have to keep ruling. Otherwise, the CHRO can very easily get discounted. You will get discounted both ways. Your peer group will look at somebody like you who's ineffectual. On the other hand, the people will look at you as somebody who's political. So you will lose it both ways. So this is one of the toughest jobs, Prashant, in the industry today. More than ever before because of the pandemic and everything. Because suddenly the moment for HR has arrived where even the workforce management, how to take the next generation workforce ahead, how to create the next generation organizations, we are actually giving the prescriptions today. We're actually continuously rejigging the options. So this is a tough call, especially when you're there on the top wearing those dual hats. It has to be a run for the last mile. Otherwise, you're never going to get there.
True. And as you said, keep that fire in your belly running and choose your battles. Be aware of these two things, and they're key at any level of leadership that you are at, especially as you said, HR is at the help today because HR has actually become business partners. There are decisions that the HR is taking of how to take business forward, and HR has never been so important for a business as it is today. So the responsibility becomes much higher, which means taking care of the aspects that we discussed today also becomes much higher, because the chances of success and failure depend on you following these aspects or living these aspects as a leader or not. So thank you, Debbie. That was very interesting. A couple of questions that have come our way. Let's see what they are. um Tamarasai Selvi, thank you. She says, do you think really things are changed with current generation? They are asked, advised to read and follow Western authors. Always entrepreneurs like Bill Gates are quoted as successful role models. Don't we have true leaders to replicate? And these concepts which you practice, these value systems, are not valid anymore. Respect. So her question is interesting. What do you have to say on this?
Well, ma'am, I think you couldn't have made a more pertinent point, and I completely agree with you. We somehow are masters at aping the West. Nothing wrong in it. We can always borrow some best practices. We always have, and we will continue to do so. But that doesn't mean that we do it at the cost of what we already have as a rich culture, as a rich background of professionalism. After all, who can boast of a JRD Tata? Who can boast of a JRD Tata? Look at the vision of the man beyond his time. I mentioned Rusi Modi as one of my idols. Okay. Today, if I look at people around, and we don't talk about them too much, but then why don't we talk about Dr. Mrs. Sudhamurthy? When I listen to every time she comes on the screen, and starting from parental advice to how you deal with workforce, she has such common sense, ground level strategies and little thoughts which she distributes to people with such ease. If we were to just pick up some of those learnings, we don't have to look east, west, north, south. We'll be happy where we are practicing those things. But somehow, quoting a Dr. Mrs. Sudhamurthy is not does not seem to be fashionable. Okay, you understand? That's probably, ma'am, what the problem with the current generation is. So understanding Arctic monkeys and their music is damn cool. Understanding who's an Instagram influencer is very cool. Point is, ma'am, we also know that. So at 52 years of age, if I can talk about all this, I'm also very cool. But at the end of the day, that's not the definition of coolness. Your modern vision and your thought process needs to hinge on not only these Western numbers and the Western world, it also has to emanate from the appreciation of your own culture, your own values, your own upbringing, and the kind of role models that you have in hand. Because I truly believe we have no dearth of them. You look at every quarter, you have somebody popping up as the new idol in the place. But yes, as you rightly said, the problem with the generation is it is not deemed or seen as fashionable. There is no buzz to it. So as long as we also don't help in creating the buzz, we will have to continue doing what we are doing, which is aping the West in a big way.
Well said, Debjani. Thank you so much for that. Another question that comes to us from a LinkedIn user is, how do we relate to intuition in leadership? As he or she says that they've read so many times that leaders are having very high level of intuitive consciousness. How can we develop such qualities, which you mentioned, ma'am?
So, absolutely. I don't know if you heard me about 40 minutes back, which is when Prashant had asked me the question from first time leader to middle management, which is when I talked about the situational leadership bit. And situational leadership helps hone your leadership qualities around these parameters. You see, many leaders, especially in the HR primarily, are looked at as people who are impulsive, spontaneous, intuitive, have a high level of sixth sense and gut feeling. Now, these are, however, I would differ and say that this is not just the preserve of the HR manager, it can be the preserve of every line manager. Because to me, every line manager who has a team to command, who has people following him, is an HR manager. Okay, we HR are only specialists in doing and executing probably solutions to business, but we don't run the business. At the end of the day, the line managers run the business, and they are the best HR managers. When you talk about intuitive leadership and intuitive consciousness, you're very correct. To be able to listen to people is a great platform on which this intuitive consciousness is built. Half your communication, I mean, it's a very passe, cliched joke, but I think it has great relevance. God has given us 2 ears and one mouth. But what we do with that one mouth is 10 times more than what we do with the 2 ears. What a hypocritical dichotomy. Okay, what we are expected to do is to really listen, because listening takes not only gives you a fundamental insight into every person, what he or she is invested in, but it also gives you a very different shade of dynamics in terms of people's thought processes. And that's the only way where you can practice intuitive consciousness, because the more you will be exposed to differences of thinking patterns, differences of expressions, differences of way people react to situations, that is the way you will understand how to react to different situations yourself. And there, situational leadership becomes very, very critical. So yes, you're right. Intuitive leadership, very, very important. It's part of authentic leadership also. I consider that to be a very, very genuine part of authentic leadership. But yes, it is not common to everybody. Some are born with it. Some have to probably work a little more harder to become a little more intuitive than what they are. But there will always be scales of difference between different leaders in terms of how far and how well they can stretch the concept.
Thank you, Debbie, for that. That brings me to a couple of questions that I have in mind. Okay, so I know that your journey has been amazing. You shared it with us, and I think there is amazing value that the audience got in terms of the difference between the challenges of first, middle, and senior level management, and the responsibilities that come with it, and what are the things that you need to keep in mind and be aware of to be better at what you already do. All right. Now, in this journey that you've had which sounds amazing. I'm sure there have been elements of fun. You also had some lighter moments in your journey of 2025 years. So a couple of questions based on that is what I have in my mind. Now, this segment that I have here is called Have You Ever? So the question that I have for you, Debbie, is have you ever been in a meeting where you have no clue why you're there?
Oh, so many times. So many times. And I've come out of the meeting also wondering what happened out there. So there are two sides of it. Okay.
Yeah,
You're right
yeah.
when you said, have I been part of meetings where I had no clue? Suddenly somebody will come rushing and say, hey, Deb, man, there's this very heavy duty meeting happening. How come you're not? Just come along. And I'm like, listen, I've got work to do. Doesn't matter. This is a critical. I said, oh, a critical says who? Says the CEO or says, probably the owner of the company who's calling for the meeting. So you go and you realize that it's an agenda which which is just there. Okay, it is either just a communication session, it is just information sharing, created with so much hype that it had to be positioned as something more to do with the person who's calling the meeting than possibly the content of the meeting. Okay, such meetings are generally like that. And then when the meeting finishes, you come out and you're like looking at that colleague and saying, hey, listen, what's your takeaway? Okay, and the colleague is looking at you and say, you tell me yours first, and then you know what's happened. So plenty of
Right.
times.
All right, all right. Now, this is again something that, as leaders, we need to be aware of that, if you're talking about it and we're having fun around it, but it's happening a lot. So, especially in pandemic, I've seen so many people suffering because of back-to-back meetings and not knowing why they are in those meetings. So, clarity of agenda of the meeting, clarity of who needs to be in that meeting in terms of listening to what's happening or adding value back to you is very important, right? Otherwise, you're wasting their time, energy, and the organizational time, money, and energy. So, please be aware of that. So, coming back to fun. So, Devjani, have you ever bunked work to watch a movie?
Yes.
You have. When was the last time you did that?
So this would be around, I think, 7 8 years back,
All
seven
right.
years back
All
almost.
right. All right.
And I don't know if you could call it a bunk. It was a Friday evening, and
Okay.
typically we used to have breakthrough session on every Friday evening where in that organization. It was a Swiss organization which was into travel and tourism. And we used to have every Friday a good, happy breakthrough meeting where we would just get together. The entire teams would get together, discuss what happened during the course of the week. Okay, sometimes over a glass of beer or sometimes over some niche coffee. So if there's a coffee parlor which is open close by, we would hop across to that parlor. So it had to be something which was a little niche, a little unique. And about 2 hours. So it was like 4:30 on a Friday evening. You would typically take off for these meetings, and you'd head home after that. And this was a part of the structured, motivational activities and team activities that we used to take thing. But one fine day, one fine Friday, and I also happen to remember the film because sometimes the film makes a lot of difference to what you were out there to achieve. Um, it was, you'll be surprised. It was one of the Avengers films.
The
Okay, it
first
was
one,
one.
maybe probably 7 years back.
No, not the first. I think it was just the second.
All right.
Okay, just a second. And because the first had created so much hype, and there was no love outpouring. I mean, in a sense, that crazy idol worship. Okay, either you were in love with the what was his name,
Iron Man.
Iron Man or Captain America, or Thor for that matter. But you had, I mean, the eye,
Options. There are a lot of
black
options to
eye.
choose from.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the men loved the other lady, the snake, Catwoman. There's that. So everyone had their favorites, and this one had just released. And people suddenly, at the spur of the moment, we were already into that coffee session, and suddenly they said, "Listen, nobody would know about it." Now, it's not a question of nobody knowing about it. There's a certain purpose for which that particular initiative generally used to take. Okay, it never used to be very ritualistic, but then there were always some takeaway points from those, which the senior leaders would always look at. But then this was like, let's just do it. Let's just do it this one time. So I still remember it was a 5:15 wala show, and we just sort of slammed into it. So if you can call that bunking office and going for a show, yes, I've done it. I've done it.
All right. So we'll call it like semi-bunking. It's not bunking, but all right. So we'll call it semi-bunking. Have you ever played a prank on anyone, Debbie, or have you been played a prank on?
Both ways.
Both ways. All right. Which one is interesting if you would like to share?
Well, I think the prank which was played on me was very, very high on energy, and even the mischief value,
All
which
right.
went to it,
What
which was
happened?
a part of it. Don't tell me to narrate the gory details, please. It was massively embarrassing. Not that I wear it very heavy on my ego, or that I wear it. I took it very personally. Not that. It's just that it's really, really embarrassing to narrate the details.
All
Okay,
right.
and
We'll talk
and
offline about it.
and yeah, and it came from people who you least expected it to come from. That was the worst part of it. Okay. So suddenly people who never really interacted with you so much, and you never really thought they were part of your inner circle, as you always have in an organization, they pulled it off, man, and it was very, very embarrassing.
Okay, I'm
But
interested
good,
to know.
but good
So
fun.
once
But
we're
but
done
good
with the
fun.
live, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, good fun.
Great. So a couple of rapid fire thoughts. I'll just say a few words. Tell me what comes to your mind. Okay, you have to be really quick. So are you ready?
Yeah,
All right. Trust,
credibility,
compassion,
faith,
feedback,
necessary.
beach,
Beach, Goa,
mountains,
fresh air,
life.
mixed bag.
Your favorite song that you would like to dedicate to leaders.
We
Please
don't
sing it
need
for us.
no. We don't need no education.
Come on, Devi. Let's sing it. Let's sing it, Devi. Two lines. Two lines.
We don't need no education. Ding, 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 ding. We don't need no
Thought
far.
control.
Yes, that's it.
Great. So on that thought to leaders that we don't need no education and we don't need no thought control. Thank you so much, Debbie. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversations. A lot of takeaway that we had for all levels of leadership that we, as promised, we could do in this 1 hour 15-minute session. But we will come back possibly after a few more weeks and go into more details and understanding the specifics even deeper. But thank you for your time. Thanks a lot, and there's a lot that we gained. Take care. Have a wonderful, wonderful day ahead. And I know you're traveling in the evening, so safe travels. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Prashant. Absolute good fun to be on the show today. As I said, there's already something in the air. I had my fill. I really loved talking. I hope the audiences also enjoyed our show. And more power to you, okay, from episode 3 onwards. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you so much, audience, for being patient and being on this show and adding value through your comments and questions. I hope we are able to add value to you and bring some insights of leadership to you. So, with that promise, I'll see you in episode 3 next Saturday. So, till then, remember that leadership is these small little things that matter the most. So, thank you so much. Take care. See you next week. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
दिलों में तुम अपनी बेताबियां लेके चल रहे हो तो जिंदा हो। नजर में ख्वाबों की बिजलियां लेके चल रहे हो तो जिंदा हो। हवा के झोंकों के जैसे आजाद रहना सीखो, तुम एक दरिया के जैसे लहरों में बहना सीखो। हर एक लम्हे से तुम मिलो, खोले अपनी बाहें, हर एक पल एक नया समा देखिए। जो अपनी आंखों में हैरानियां लेके चल रहे हो तो जिंदा हो। दिलों में तुम अपनी बेताबियां लेके